And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and this is part two of our MLR 2025 season preview of the Eastern Conference. Of course, I've titled this The Contenders. Just like with the Western Conference, these are the three teams that I feel definitely have a chance to compete in the playoffs. As I mentioned in part one, the Eastern Conference a lot more competitive this season, but I feel it's really going to be more of a competition of the five bottom teams competing to see who gets to go into the playoffs along with your two-time defending MLR champions, the New England Freejacks, who, a little spoiler, I feel have a very good chance of making it a three-peat back into the MLR championship game. But a lot of things have changed in the offseason. Interestingly enough, these three teams not only have the fact that they're considered contenders by myself in common, but also all three teams have new head coaches. So let's, without further ado, let's start with this preview. Let's stick with the Chicago Hounds first. Now, the Chicago Hounds ended the season last season 8-7-1, 45 points, finishing third place. Interestingly enough, or oddly enough, they lost their head coach Sam Harris, who's now part of Rugby Football Club LA, with 3 weeks left in the season. They were 5-7-1. Now, granted, as I mentioned before, when that happened last season, my videos, odd time to get rid of your head coach. Granted, Chicago is a weird team, kind of made, when it first debuted, kind of made up of an amalgam of LA Giltinis and Austin Gilgroni players, which at the time were two of the strongest teams in the Western Conference. So putting them together as almost like a super team, it seemed almost, and also too, Sam Harris, who was the coach of the Austin Gilgronis, basically picking up most of the players that he's familiar with, along with some super talented players from LA. It almost seemed academic, like there's no way the Chicago Hounds can't make the championship game. And yet, in year one, if I remember correctly, they only won like 2 games, if that. They really struggled. And then year two was no better. Finally, in year three, it looked like maybe they'll turn things around, but at this point, they were 5-7-1. So I can see how there was some issues with maybe the way the leadership was going. Again, it seemed kind of weird that they've struggled so much, especially with the roster that's as talented as they had, that they were always seeming to lose games that they shouldn't have. So unfortunately, they get rid of Sam Harris. 3 weeks left. Those last 3 weeks, they win every game, make the playoffs pretty easily, and even win their first game in the playoffs, defeating the NOLA Gold, who were the hot team going into the playoffs. I mean, throughout the season, they were the surprise in the Eastern Conference, especially to yours truly. So Chicago did really well. Of course, then unfortunately faced the buzzsaw, which is New England, in the Eastern Conference Finals, and they ended up losing that one. But it looked like the turnaround might have been in place. Now, with that being said, new head coaches in place is Chris Latham, former Australian rugby player. He was the 2024. He was the assistant coach of Seattle Seawolves last year. He was also the head coach of Utah at one point. Unfortunately, in 2020, that was a truncated season, if everyone remembers, with COVID. So there wasn't a full season at that point. And then after that, Chris went off to pursue other ventures outside of MLR. Just coming back now, first time as a head coach. Like I said, last year was the assistant coach to Seattle. So now he will be head coaching again with the Chicago squad. Chris Latham is a former Australian Wallaby. He has 78 caps, and he has the second most tries in the history of Australian Wallaby players with 40. So very, very impressive player. Let's see how well he does as the coach of a talented squad like Chicago. Of course, Chicago playing at SeatGeek Stadium, the biggest stadium that MLR has now with 20,000 seats. They did a lot in the offseason, especially with some international players. So let's talk about the players they picked up. Tim Sewell, first of all, former Saracens player, English-born South African player, very talented fly half. has a lot of experience. He also helped win the Currie Cup in his home country of South Africa. Very, very talented player. In 2 years with the Harlequins, scored 290 points. So, I mean, very, very talented guy. Easily will be a figurehead in this Hounds organization. Also, to Ollie Devoto, former Exeter Chiefs, 9 years with the Chiefs, 127 appearances, 110 points, 2 caps for England. He can play center, fullback, fly half. I mean, this guy, pretty impressive. Both of those players will probably be in line to replace, unfortunately, the departed Luke Carty, a capped Eagle fly half who's going to go off to New Orleans. Both of them very, very talented players. Easily big pickups for Chicago with the international feel as well. Speaking of international players, Matt Oru, who is a Canadian player from the Canadian Seven Systems, big, powerful runner. I mean, he is the epitome of what you want in a sevens player. Not only is he super fast, very, very big, hits very hard. He's going to fit in just nicely with Major League Rugby, as well as Noah Fleisch, another Canadian player, known for not only playing with the Canadian Sevens, but also the Pacific Pride, which is a Rugby 15s team for the British Columbian Premier League up in Canada. They also picked up Sam Walsh, former RFCLA player, Cal Berkeley product, also fly half, who will also probably be working with Ollie Devoto and Tim Swale to replace Luke Carty. Coming back, of course, you have all the usual suspects with a very talented Chicago squad. Luke White, capped Eagle. Bryce Campbell, former Eagles captain. Noah Brown from the Sevens system. Of course, the very hard-hitting Lucas Rumble. Michael Hand, who just made his Rugby Sevens debut with the USA Eagles Sevens team. Michael Baska, Paddy Ryan, both of them capped Eagles. Dylan the Butcher Fawcett. Can't look further than him for talent. 12 tries last season, was the most tries of any player last season. He is, second to Mike Manson, who scored 14 tries. He does hold the record, though, for most tries in Major League Rugby history with 55 and counting. This guy just can't stop scoring tries whenever he's on the pitch. And of course, Adrian Carlesi, fullback, 78 points, most points scored by any player for Chicago last season. And of course, you have the two talented wingers, probably the most dangerous winger combination in Major League Rugby, Julian Dominguez and Nate the Great Osberger. Both of them capped Eagles, both of them scoring tries by the handful. Like I said, on paper, super talented team. It's just weird that they struggled so much. So hopefully maybe new coaching regime will change some things. As I mentioned before, Luke Carty is a big name that they lost. Also to a big presence that they're losing, the very talented Billy Meeks, who will be making his way back to LA with RFCLA, but he is a big presence that will be missing off of the pitch in Chicago. But again, Chicago doing quite a bit to improve the team. Let's talk about another team that's done a little bit of improving themselves, though I don't know as much as Chicago, but this would be the NOLA Gold, who, as I mentioned before, were the surprise team for me in the Eastern Conference, finishing second place, 10-6, just one game, 50 points, one game behind the New England Freejacks. Of course, unfortunately, by the time they made it to the playoffs, they lost a little bit of steam. They lost to Chicago in the Eastern Conference semifinal. But again, a very impressive performance by the NOLA Gold. First time that they've ever made the playoffs. We'll see if they can get back to it. Of course, they play in the Gold Mine, 10,000-seat arena. Of course, too, they have a new head coach, and this might be the biggest name and change for NOLA Gold. Danny Lee, former coach of the San Diego Legion, 3 years with San Diego, great talented coach, decided to move to the other conference in Major League Rugby and is now going to coach the NOLA Gold. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what Dan Lee does with an Eastern Conference team. Not to put any shade on Dan Lee, but not having to have to deal with Seattle as often maybe might change things for Dan Lee. But again, super talented coach, easily can take NOLA a little bit further in the playoffs because Danny Lee, of course, has that playoff experience. Some other pickups for NOLA Gold, big Joey Taufwete, talented capped Eagle for the USA team. Hooker scored 6 tries last season for Seattle. Paul Mullins, another talented capped Eagle from Utah prop. As I mentioned before, they're picking up Luke Carty, another Eagle from the Chicago Hounds. So a lot of Eagles now moving their way to NOLA Gold. Another Eagle that they're picking up, Ruben De Haas, talented Eagle who used to play in England for the Saracens, now making his way to Major League Rugby here in the States. There's some very, very talented Eagles that are being added to the NOLA system. Of course, along with them, the returning players, Damian Stevens, Luke Campbell, who is an Eagles himself, Reese Botha, very talented fly half, 55 points, was the most scored by any player for NOLA Gold, 71% conversion rate as well, which was the top in the league. JP Duplessis, Ross Depperschmidt, Cam Dolan, of course, former captain of the Eagles, Tessamoni or Moni Tongoia, 8 tries scored. He's a capped Eagle as well. And then the very talented rookie for NOLA, Jonah Mau, who scored 6 tries, second most by any NOLA Gold player. Very talented player. He was a big pickup for NOLA last season. We'll see how he does in year 2 here in Major League Rugby. Now, couple of players that they lost that, of course, will be affecting them. The biggest one, Dougie Fife, Scottish player who's been playing for NOLA Gold for the last couple of seasons. Don't know exactly what's happened to him. I couldn't really see anything in any notes or anything on his Instagram, but no longer playing for Major League Rugby. He is definitely a guy that if a team can somehow pick him up in the later part of the season, he would be a great grab to get. Of course, the very talented fly half Rodney Iona, who's going off to Seattle. And then Taniela Filimone, who's going back to Super Rugby with the Highlanders. Scored the most points for NOLA with 11 tries. So very, very talented. Very talented winger for NOLA, who is no longer going to be there. So again, some big pieces missing from NOLA, but some big pieces being added as well. I think, honestly, on paper, Chicago might have done a little bit more in the offseason. But, you know, especially with the way that NOLA finished last season, 10-6, pretty impressive. And most of that roster is coming back. Added now the new head coach, Danny Lee. NOLA Gold could do another run in the playoffs. But will it be enough to take down the two-time defending MLR champions, New England Freejacks? We'll see. Let's talk about the champs right now with New England, finishing 11-5, 55 points. Of course, they defeated Old Glory, they defeated Chicago Hounds in the playoffs, and then, of course, they let down the hammer on the San Diego Legion to walk away with their second consecutive MLR Shield. Only the second team to ever do that. Only the second team in Major League Rugby to have 2 titles under their belts. Of course, I'm talking about going against Seattle. I'm sorry, they defeated Seattle in the championship game. Of course, they defeated the only other team to have gone back-to-back with titles as well as 2 championships. So kind of apropos how that worked out. Returning to the Veteran Memorial Stadium with 5,000-seater. The, again, change for them, just like I mentioned with Hounds and Old Glory, a new head coach, Scott Matthey, who, oddly enough, 2-time Coach of the Year, 2 Major League Rugby Shields. As we mentioned before on the channel, it's hard in any sport to win a championship, let alone win 2. And you're 2-time Coach of the Year. It might have been just a lot. I mean, what else can Scott Matthey do in Major League Rugby? It might have been that was it. And also, too, might have been given the offer that he just couldn't refuse. He is now coaching in Edinburgh Rugby, which is up in Europe, up in Scotland, playing for the URC, which is a pretty phenomenal promotion in itself. So Scott Matthey possibly moving on to a little bit bigger career for him. And again, nothing to be shy of with his career here in Major League Rugby. 2-time Coach of the Year, 2-time championships. Easily, you could argue, the most successful coach in Major League Rugby history. Now, that opens the door for a new coach for New England, and in comes the returning Ryan Martin. Ryan Martin was the coach of New England back in 2021 when New England ended the season 10-6, which actually only got them 4th place. Now, you might be thinking 4th place, is not a good place for New England to be, but 4th place, 48 points. In that year, 3rd place, the NOLA Gold, 10-5-1. They finished with 51 points. So New England was only 3 points away from 3rd place, and then 2nd place was Rooney, 10-6, so 53 points. So they were 5 points away from 2nd place. So technically, they were 1 game away with a bonus point from making it 2nd place to getting into the playoffs. Because at that point, only 2 teams from each conference was allowed. Rooney, of course, made it into the championship that season and ended up winning the whole thing. So nothing really to be ashamed of with that record. Ryan Martin, though, left because he had an opportunity to coach the Rebels in Australia for Super Rugby, whereas he was the attack and backs coach. And then in 2023 was given the opportunity to coach in Japan for the Toyota Verblitz, which actually reunited him with Bodie Waka, who, of course, a phenomenal player with New England back in the day. He was the assistant coach there and backs coach. Now has the opportunity to return as head coach to New England to see if he can continue the legacy of New England and bring up a three-peat in at least the championship game, which, again, when you look on paper with what the team is, they did a lot to improve on a team that's already pretty phenomenal to begin with. So let's go over who they've added. First of all, Geronimo Gomez-Vara from the Dallas Jackals, phenomenal flanker, 5 tries scored last season. He was the 2024 Forward of the Year last season. So he is now added to the team. Brock Webster, very talented Canadian Sevens player, fullback, along with Josiah Mora, another talented Canadian Sevens player. They also add in a young Fijian prop from Fiji Ajura, Jone Koreduedoa. And then Joe Johnston, a very talented flanker from New Zealand, is also being added to the team. Of course, they also signed their 2 draft picks, Kaipono Kayoshi, who I mentioned before in my MLR Collegiate Draft preview, that he is a super talented player. St. Mary's College of LA, St. Mary's College of California, 4th overall pick in the 2024 draft. And then Matt Carrion, 14th overall pick in the 2024 draft from Life University. 2 very talented players who could possibly make a mark in the season to start. And then, of course, let's talk about the people that are coming back. Paul Bellicana, very talented winger. Wyan Conradi, LaRue Milan, Ben Lesage, talented center. Of course, Wayne Vanderbank, who is the center. 52 points scored. He was the player of the year last season. Second on New England for most tries scored with 10 tries. Andrew Cortrain, 37 points, 7 tries scored. And then, of course, the return of Jason Patros, who was the 2023 player of the year. 135 points, 6 tries. Second most points scored, right behind Mac Mason. And if you look at the lineup, you have the 2023 Player of the Year, Jason Patros. You have the 2024 Player of the Year, Wayne Vandermeer. You have the 2024 Forward of the Year with Geronimo Gomez-Vara. You also technically have the 2024 Marcus Callaway Conway Impact Award winner in Ben Lesage. You used to have the Coach of the Year with Scott Matthew, and then you used to have, unfortunately, New England did lose Reese McDonald, but he was the Back of the Year. So you had all the talent last season on this team. So New England, again, on paper, looking like a very impressive team, and they somehow were able to prove even more so, in my opinion, with the pickup of a guy like Geronimo Gomez-Vara, Brock Webster, Josiah Mora. And now, again, let's talk about the losses. Reese McDonald, Back of the Year, as I mentioned before, going over to across the country to RFCLA. Big pickup for us, big loss for New England. And then Toby Fricker, who is on loan right now. He is a capped Eagle. He is on short-term loan to the Bristol Bears in Europe. But that means he can come back later in the season, so it's not a complete loss. So Reese McDonald is, and also they, of course, lost Mitchie Wilson as well. He's going over to Anthem, Carolina. So a couple big key losses. Mitch Wilson's pretty good, and Reese McDonald, of course, is phenomenal. So, but again, Geronimo Gomez-Vara is no slouch, and as I mentioned a couple names before, and they're still bringing back so much of the talent from the last 2 seasons of their championship runs. Honestly, guys, I really as much as I want to, I really don't know who can take down New England. Because the way it is on paper, I still feel New England is the team to beat. I can almost guarantee you that they'll make it at least back into the championship game. Now, will they win it? Anything can happen. Technically, anything can happen in the playoffs as well, but I really do feel New England has an easy chance of making it back, at least into the playoffs. So it really is going to be which 3 teams in the Eastern Conference follow. Again, we do have some coaching changes, but the fact that you're bringing back a guy who's very familiar with the New England system and Ryan Martin, I don't feel that's as big of a change. NOLA, of course, I feel getting a guy like Danny Lee is actually huge for them, so maybe not that big of a change for them. With Chicago, that's probably going to be the biggest question mark Chris Latham. But again, Chicago has a very talented team to begin with, so I feel Chicago and NOLA will probably make it back in. It's just going to be who's in that 4th spot. Is it going to be Old Glory? Is it going to be Miami? Anthem, I don't know if they've done enough to improve to get that high up, but who knows? They'll definitely win a couple games. As I mentioned, Eastern Conference this season, I feel so much more competitive than last season, and definitely I feel a lot more competitive than what the Western Conference might be. But either way, it just adds up to a very exciting year 8 for Major League Rugby. Of course, I will be doing a overall way too early predictor of where I feel all these teams will finish. So you'll see where I picked them all. But again, I'm gonna have to really deep dive into it. But overall, I really do feel right now, just on surface, I feel New England pretty much will probably be the #1 team. But again, anything can happen. And who knows? But again, that's what makes this super, super exciting for me. And I'm hoping for all you Major League Rugby fans and rugby fans in general that season number 8 for MLR is going to be another exciting season. So that's it for my previews. Thank you very much for checking them out. Let me know what you think about them. Let me know who you think is going to be on top in the Eastern Conference. And again, thank you very much for watching my videos, and I'll see you on the pitch.